Good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and start again today. Unbeknownst to me, when I scheduled these last week after we voted out the 07 budget, when I mentioned Tuesday and Wednesday at 1 o'clock, I didn't realize that. Well, I knew that there were going to be normal other committees meeting, but I guess that the last 2 days have been CON meetings in one portion of the building here. All-day meetings, and then we found ourselves, we have two members that are both chairs of the respective civil and non-civil judiciary committees, and they have had meetings. I think yesterday one included the bill that's dealing with capital sentencing and so forth. So we've run them across CON, a fairly substantial issue in this year's legislature, and then some pretty impactful legislation over in judiciary where, like I say, two of our members are the chairs over there, and a number of our members are on that committee as well. So we're thin in our membership, but today, but we appreciate it. I do know Chairman Day will be joining us shortly, as will Chairman Bernard. But we'll, in the interest of time, sort of set forth what we're looking for today and go ahead with our departments. What we had asked, we had the presentation of the departments a few weeks ago, and again, we had hoped to have a more full attendance from the committee members, but given our constraints, can't be in two places at once. We'll go with the membership we had. We had hoped this would just be a question and answer session, so I know that's the way it was represented to the department, so we don't expect a full, as detailed a presentation as we had a few weeks ago. But we're going to call each of the departments up, let you do an overview. Specifically, you may want to highlight, the new programs or the new monies that you have in the budget, and then give the opportunity for the committee members to ask questions, and we'll try to go from there. Mentioned yesterday that I was attempting to appoint sort of subcommittees within this subcommittee to make sure that we deal with and ferret out any specific questions that we may have, because we have a lot to do in a compressed time period due to the 07 and 08 budget needing to come out close together. So the DOC already has been meeting with their group of our subcommittee, and there may be some things to report back. I'll let Chairman Chambers drive that portion of the agenda at the proper time. But if the Department of Corrections is here, we're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Brian Owens. I'm the Assistant Commissioner with the Department of Corrections. Sir, Commissioners at Georgia State Prison today. I also have Ms. Becky East here today, who's our Budget Director. If it's okay, have her give you the budget highlights of the request, and then I'll stand by for questions as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just quickly kind of highlight our request. As you stated before, we have been working with a portion of the committee to go ahead and answer some questions. We have several different items in the 08 request: Pelham, PRC operational funds. That is something that is an annualization basically from this year's, from the 07 request. We have a private prison CPI request for the 4%, and that's an annualization of the 4% CPI from FY07. We have a request to fund D. Ray James private prison 50 additional beds. We have a shortfall in our utilities of about, we're projecting about $10 or $11 million, and the governor recommended 7.1. We also have the annualization of some FY07 beds, and that's for Bainbridge, Johnson, and Calhoun. And there's also, you'll see some reduction of the startup and operational, which we were given a portion of in FY07, so that will come out. Valdosta Transition Center is a request in for some startup and operational funds. We also have some fast-track beds, Phase 1 and 3, for Wilcox, Valdosta, Smith, Macon, and Dooley, and that's $15.2 million. We have a request in for a 4% CPI for the MCG, that is the health services contract, for $5.9 million. We have a request in for $5.2 million to cover the health care, the direct costs for the health care inmate health care claims. That's $5.2 million. There's a dental health request in for $597,418, a mental health request for $469,000. And then the rest of the request, I believe, relates to the overall changes, which are the increase in workers' comp, the annualization of the pay raises, and so forth. We also have two capital outlay requests. One is for the headquarters relocation to TIF for $31.9 million, and then there are 1,024 fast-track beds at $24 million. And we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Heath. I know, as it turns out, two of the three members of the committee that I asked to work with you guys are here, and perhaps if either one of those would want to volunteer, where we are, or I have a couple of questions related, but I appointed that group and wanted them to drive down. I mean, one of the questions that I want to get to, and I suspect they're already covering it, is how we're handling. You mentioned the increase in the cost of the contract with MCG. Just tell us how that came about. At the appropriate time, or now's fine. Let's just do that, and then I'll go to Ms. Chambers and let her tell us, because I know you guys have been doing a lot of good work with them over the last week or so.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, your timing's perfect, because tomorrow Commissioner Donald will be having a face-to-face meeting with Dr. Ron at the Medical College of Georgia. We've asked A.T. Kearney, who you all are familiar with, is working, of course, with DOAS to help us renegotiate that contract with the Medical College of Georgia, and not only with them, but also with MHM, who provides our mental health services. And we've simply asked Dr. Ron and his school of professionals there to tell us what a constitutional level of health care is, and to ensure that we're providing that to the inmate population, but quite frankly, nothing in excess to that inmate population. That is one of our larger areas of our budget that we try to keep control over. As a matter of fact, we have a good news story, Mr. Chairman. Our pharmaceutical purchases are actually a little bit down this year, even though we have an additional 5,000 inmates in the Georgia prison system. And that's simply sitting back and letting the business professionals tell us how to organize ourselves to save on those pharmaceutical costs. So we believe that once we get this contract renegotiated, at a minimum, we'll slow the rate of increase, if not put the brakes on for a short period of time on these health care costs.
So basically, the increase in the contract with MCG, are they increasing the costs to us for the services, and or providing additional? I mean, I guess I'm not familiar with that contract. I know that's one of the things that the committee has asked you for, but we don't have an all-in contract with them, if you will, but we're contracted. Perhaps that's not the best way to say it. We don't have, and this is a bad analogy, but it's the only way I can get my mind together to verbalize it right now. We don't have an all-you-can-eat, if you will, medical purchase of them. We don't say, for this much money, you treat everybody we send over there. The contract with them is simply based on previous experience of the number of inmate occurrences we have, and then we know what our billable is. How does that relate to, and it may be less, I may be careful the question I ask you. You ask a question you don't know the answer to. But how does that relate to what an insurance company in the area would pay as a reasonable and customary charges? Are we at most favored nation status with them? Or?
We're actually, I believe, a little bit lower. That was a 2 or 3 part question there.
Right.
If I may, let me try to address some of that. We know what previous years, of course, per inmate rate has been for mental health care, and dental health care. So that's our baseline. We take a look at what we project the population to grow. Last year it grew about 8%. Our total inmate population. We are required by law to provide a constitutional level of health care. So based upon all those factors, we sit down with their medical professionals, Dr. Sharon Luce, who works for the Department of Corrections, who's nationally certified in 2 states, and comes from the private sector healthcare industry. She then negotiates what she believes will be the total number of incidents, if you will, medical touches, if you will, and then what that cost ought to be, and then we come up with a figure and request the appropriation. The other part of that question, sir, is on the 4% CPI increase. That is part of the contract to pay their staff and all their services that we would ask for an appropriation from the governor, of course, and from the House and the Senate to whatever that CPI increase is so that they can cover their costs.
For the Medical College of Georgia?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I have a question further down the road, but I'll. We talked about this before, Becky. I remember you and I know you had already made this, long before I landed here, as far as this request, for the budget. But what bothers me, or what I would like to see us do, and it may be next year before we can do it, is your utilities. I mean, if your actual expenditures were 30 and then 36 that we know for FY06, and you have a current budget of it says 29. I know you requested some money at mid-year, and we're working on the 07. But you have your actual budget request at 43. The governor recommended 30. I mean, what is the actual cost to turn on the lights, and why don't we budget a line number that reflects actual costs? I mean, we're in a continuation budget where, and it's happening in other departments. I don't fault you for that, but I mean, I'd like us to get to the point. If we can't do it this year, I'd like us to get to the point where we align the budgeted funds with reasonable expectation if we're going to take that money and do that job. I understand we're not going to hamstring. You don't need to be hamstrung in a situation where, if we budget X dollars for utilities and there's not quite enough there, or if there's a little more than enough there that you could buy office supplies with them if you need. I mean, you have to have some level within programs to do what you need to do. But it's clear to me that if in 06 we budgeted, $36 million, that and you've had, my utility bills have gone up. I suspect yours have as well. That we're going to have a need for more money than you budgeted. Now, I mean, why have you just been told not to?
Well, I think the challenge is I understand what you're saying. I believe where you would like to see us shift some money around and actually put it in utilities versus maybe personal services or regular operating or wherever we have excess funds. The challenge is we really don't have the excess money to move around. We have the ability to move that money around, and if there were funds available.
I don't mean to, but you had to because you've paid the bills. In the past. I mean, you weren't budgeted in 06 $36 million for utilities.
Correct, we were not.
And you paid
Over
the
the
bill.
last 3
So that means
years,
somewhere else you had money budgeted that you didn't need. Again, we may not be able to accomplish that task with this budget, but as we move forward and prepare your budget, for the next fiscal year, I think it makes sense to properly align the revenues where they're going to be spent. We're going to miss. I mean, nobody's perfect on the projections. But I do think we want to get to the point of, you knew when you got last year's budget allocation you would have to take money from somewhere and pay utilities because you didn't have as much money budgeted as you paid the year before.
Actually, let me give you a little bit of history that might kind of help understand how we got to where we are today. Over the last 3 years, we have actually either received supplemental funding, which I believe in 06 we received supplemental funding to help with the utilities problem. The year before that, I think the 2 years before that, there were some revenue sources that were used. So either the last 3 years, we either used a revenue source or we received supplemental funding to correct the problem. So there's always been a problem, and we've always had to make arrangements to have it covered. The issue is it's never been a permanent fix.
Well, and again, we have limited funds. I'm not saying if you ran the number up to the full number that we wouldn't have to find the money someplace else. We don't have unlimited resources. But if we go forward and we know that our experience says it took, just for ease of discussion here, $1,200 to run the prison utilities for 12 months. If we only budget $9 million, we should put in the budget document, we think that's 9 months worth funding. I mean, you remember when we came in and we started looking at your budget when you came into the office, I was wondering why 98% of some of the fund lines had been spent and we were only 7 months in the budget. Now, your explanation of that was fine because you encumber the money when you enter into the contract, so it can't be moved for anything else. That makes sense. But when most people look at the budget, you have the biggest budget, in my area, and I think that's what confuses, probably led to some confusion, with the 07 budget, is because we don't see the money lining up. Again, I don't fault you individually for doing that. That seems to be the way things have been done around here in the past. I'm just telling you to give you some cover if you need it with your superiors or with OPB or whoever else it is. It makes sense for this committee to be able to look at where the money is really going to be spent. So I know we've talked about that before, and I guess just wanted to talk about it here, that we're going to work with you to try to properly align that. If that means that money has to come out of another area, then we're going to know when we prepare the budget, we have a prison system to operate, we need this much to keep the lights on and the place heated and air conditioned, and we got to put the money there. And if that means it has to come somewhere else or an additional allocation, we'll have to do that. But I just think that makes sense from a utilities perspective, and there are probably some other things because people get people get an uneasy feeling, legislators do, when we leave and we budget some money and it's up in this area and all of a sudden it doesn't get needed there, so it goes someplace else. They get less of a feel for being able to hold. I know Ms. Chambers has a bill that has passed the House and going to the Senate, and Chairman Royal has a committee that's going to be looking into that. Again, we're not saying anything illegal, immoral is being done. It's just we want to help. We want to help align it where it really goes. So, yeah. Did you have something, Ms. Chambers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The study committee on Corrections Department expenditures met for the first time this past week, or formally for the first time, started going over some stuff. I want to compliment the staff of Corrections for pulling together this massive amount of information so quickly, and it was greatly appreciated. We are still examining things. The more we look into it, of course, being the naturally curious folks that we are, the more questions we actually have. First of all, I would like to ask, since you're here now, if you can give us a little more detail, actually a lot more detail, on the Tift College campus breakdown. We've got this nice little chart here that shows where everything's budgeted, including the asbestos abatement, which I know needs to be done. We've got, what, $1.198 million just for asbestos and the $3 million for site work. It doesn't really clearly show exactly how much of this work has been done and where it's going, because we've got that $30 million bond that we're paying debt service on. It would give us great comfort to have a little more detail, and I'll get with you guys a little more and show you where we want to go on that.
Okay.
The main question I want to ask now, all right, we've got 769 active credit cards out from Department of Corrections employees. 4 of them have credit limits of over $1 million. For what purpose do we need credit cards with state employees with $1 million credit limit?
Do you know the names of those staff? I believe they're in
yes,
our
I do.
purchasing office. Now, I don't have the list with
They
me.
are in purchasing. Ms. Shirley Beasley, a Purnell Creighton, I guess it's Utah Shepherd,
Uta Shepherd, yes, ma'am.
and Charles Smith.
Those are all 4 individuals that are responsible in our main purchasing office. I'm not sure of why the limit is exactly what it is. We can do some research on that. I don't know if at one time there was a purchase that needed to be made, and that's why the credit card limit is so high. We can certainly find that out for you. But those are the 4 people that are in our purchasing office, and they sometimes end up doing a lot of the purchasing for the entire department. You know, when facilities have a limited they're limited on their authorization level in the field. So if they have to purchase an item that exceeds their limit, then it's up to our main purchasing office and their agents to do that.
Okay.
So that's part of it, but I can check.
Yeah,
give you some
you did
history.
provide for the subcommittee or credit card policies, which are good. I'm glad to see that you have a really strict policy. In fact, I think I'll photocopy it and give it to Marta.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that no purchase is greater than $5,000. But on these $1 million credit cards, they're allowed a single transaction limit of up to $100,000 each. So their credit cards are set up differently than what your own internal policies allow. And
Well,
it was the feeling of the members of the subcommittee that having credit cards with $1 million, 4 of them, being able to go out and charge in 1 month of $4 million if purchasing wanted to. I doubt that they do, and there's been no evidence that they have. But it just seems kind of unusual to be able to get expenditures of that level on a credit card rather than coming through a regular appropriations or accounting type process. It would seem to me that if a vendor or someone is providing something of that cost, that having a check written for it as opposed to a credit card that has the chance of incurring late fees, interest, and these other things, and not being able to track it through an appropriations type document rather than a Visa bill. There was some concern about that.
okay, well, you have a couple of different questions in there. Regardless of the method of purchase, whether it's done by a purchase card or a PO, it is all seen the exact same way when it hits the budget. So that expense will be coded the exact same whether it's done by a purchase card or by a PO. Now, with that being said, the purchase with the purchasing card or through a PO, they have to follow the same guidelines. So if there is a purchase made for $100,000, then they have followed the same guidelines on that P card purchase that they would have followed had they done a manual purchase order. And the benefit, and I know you've probably read this in what we supplied, is the benefit to the state is the rebate that we earn on the purchasing card. And corrections, we had over $18 million charged on our Visa card last year, and that earned the General Treasury $255,000. And that rebate goes directly to the General Treasury. We have just found that it's more efficient to use the P card. We have procedures in place that follow up and review samples of all the purchases. In fact, I think you'll be pleased with the information I brought today. It is all the backup documentation on everything that you asked for with a P card. And it answers probably a lot of questions that your committee has, and I'll be glad to follow up and answer any more you have. I'll look into why that limit is so high. I'm sure probably at one time there was a reason for it, and I don't know what that is, but I'll be glad to find out.
Yeah, it just seems like a tremendous amount of credit availability, and even with the rebates and everything, what are the fees for these cards?
There are no fees for the card.
There's no fees at all?
No fees. There are no late fees. There are no over-the-limit fees because they do not allow us to go over the limit. The purchase will not be approved at the time of the transaction. There are no fees to issue the cards. There's no fee to the state to have this service. And basically, the way I understand it is a vendor is charged the 3%, and we get back actually 1.4% of that. So we actually make money on this. But there are no fees. No interest accrues because we do not carry forward a balance.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm going to let Ms. Chambers continue, but
for now.
we're not going to get to the bottom of this today. But, I mean, most businesses out there negotiate with their vendors. You're a billion-dollar business. If you're spending $18 million, I don't know where you would be buying them. But I did an extensive project for GE once, and to electronically do purchases and manage their cash terms with vendors. They could get 2% back for paying, 210 net 30, all these things. Real easy to me. If we bought $18 million worth of stuff, 1% of that's $180,000. I mean, if you're, I don't know what your time value of money is worth, in the state treasury, but if it's 0.5% a month, I mean, we'd save $90,000 if we could just put off paying them 30 days, which you normally get 30-day terms with your vendors. My question is, I understand the convenience for a quick purchase you need to make. That makes sense to me. You're spending $90 or $18 million a year. It seems that we would be better to negotiate a contract with people and negotiate payment terms, cut purchase orders and be billed than credit cards. I'll leave them to drill down on that later with you. But if that weren't the case, everybody would be, doing hundreds of millions. I mean, I tell you, if Visa's paying us 1.5% and it's costing the vendor 3%, Visa's making money. I mean, there's a reason that the banks are all located on Manhattan, in billion-dollar buildings. I mean, it only makes sense if the vendor's paying 3% to Visa to take the credit card. And actually, on purchases that large, they're probably not. There's a sliding downward scale. They pay 3% if I go and buy a pack of gum, but on a big purchase, they probably don't. Those are things I'll let the committee work on. But some of that sounds good on the uptake. But I'm guessing somebody some bank that handed us those, like who? I'll ask you this: those are Visa cards. With what bank are they with?
Bank of America.
Okay, do we bid that process where those credit cards are given?
I'm not sure DOS actually handles that.
There you have it.
It's probably 3,000 plus vendors you're talking about that we actually use on that card. And, for purchases like where we buy from Allen Vigil, we'll buy Ford vehicles, we do get the discounts when we pay within a certain amount of time, and those are not put on the Visa card.
Yeah,
so we do take advantage of those discounts.
Again, I'll let the committee drill down to that, but I could see where, it just strikes me that if this were a great thing, we ought to be spending all the state's money on Visa cards instead of doing it, and we're not. So, maybe we should be going in the other direction. I think it bears, Ms. Chambers, questions, and it does give me pause to, have $1 million limits on it. I can't think of any place where an individual should be able to spend. Chairman O'Neill's chairman of Ways and Means, and I think your credit card's only $500,000, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm joking aside. I just can't think of any place where anybody needs $1 million limit. But again, enough said about that. Did you have anything, Representative Powell? I know you've worked with along with Chairman Chambers and Chairman Bernard.
I'm finished.
What number are you down there, sir?
17. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first let me compliment the committee. It's always good to see folks that are trying to ferret out all the activities of the bureaucracy of state agencies. And I don't think corrections should feel like y'all are being single issued head on, because I saw it yesterday in the judiciary's budget. And I commend the members of this committee for trying to figure out just exactly what works and how the system's working, given that there hadn't been a lot of cooperation between the legislative branch and the executive branch over the last several years. But that being said, I'd like to ask a question, and this goes back to an earlier time. The big contracts is something that I'm interested in. The health care contract that we have with the medical school. Back a few years ago, Brian, I think you remember, because I was railing about this, that the backup documents we found at that time, there was $100,000 in that medical contract that was actually paying for someone that was associated with the staff of MAG to do overview that y'all already had somebody in the department doing. Is that gone away?
Representative Powell, I do remember that specifically, but I'm going to have to get back with you. I'm not sure if it's gone away or not. I don't want to give you a wrong answer, but I can certainly get back with you in a day and let you know.
Yeah, those are the things that I'm interested in, monies that are unnecessarily spent under the cloak of these larger contracts. Have y'all, second question, have y'all considered other alternatives other than dealing with the medical school? Rebidding, looking at what's good for the goose should be good for the gander with the system that they use under community health right now on Medicaid and state health. Have y'all looked at other alternatives to try to maximize the health care cost?
Yes, sir. As you're quite aware, there are other private vendors out there that provide medical, dental, and mental health care, in prison and jail systems. I think that's really the beauty of having an A.T. Kearney on board, who's really a procurement expert. We've asked them to take a look at it for us because our core competency is running prisons and supervising probationers, not providing medical services. Through conversations with Medical College of Georgia, Department of Corrections, A.T. Kearney, we decided that for this fiscal year, perhaps the best approach would be to renegotiate that contract, to let A.T. Kearney help on that renegotiation, and then after 1 year take a look at it and then consider rebidding again, because it has been a while since that contract's been rebid.
Yeah, those are the kind of concerns that I have, and I think that maybe the chairman has asked for maybe a detailed, and I can't remember what was the documents that they used to use as the backup, the ones that we never were privileged to over the years that OPB used, and things that y'all use in your departmental documents that backs up.
We'll give you whatever documents you ask for. I'm not sure specifically what you're asking for on documents. We can either talk offline if you've got more information. We'll provide you that information.
Yeah, there was a document, and I can't remember the term that they used. OPB used them for years, and it was the actual documentation that every department used, as opposed to the line items. It was a more detailed breakdown of the line items. Those are some things that that might be helpful. Shifting gears, maybe for the benefit of the committee members, talked about TIF College.
Yes, sir.
Maybe just give an overview: who owns the property, who owned the property, number of buildings,
yes, sir.
Long-term goals, all of the cost that's involved. And it's not a surprise that I've been opposed to this for several years. The idea that it was sold on was that how much money in rent this was going to save us. Mm-hmm. And my objection to that was that the rent they were talking about saving are state-owned buildings at Twin Towers.
Yes, sir.
So it's all actually any rent payments is a paper transfer from the department back to another state agency that did not leave. And that the philosophy about continuing to build and all, that's not where the real cost is long-term. Mm-hmm. The long-term cost is the maintenance.
Sure.
And the substantial cost of continue, but could you give maybe the committee an overview, including possibly any plans that may not have been surfaced on paper about other capital outlays, like new buildings, new structures down there?
Sure.
So that we can maybe get an overall figure of, in fact, how much money are we really talking about for the long-term development of this old Tiff College campus down there?
I'll do my best. That was about 20 questions there. I'll do my best. If I get off track, just stop me. By way of background, yes, sir. Okay. By way of background, Tiff College, for those folks that may not know, is in Monroe County, Forsyth, Georgia. Originally a Baptist college dating back to 1859. It's a 42-acre property. I believe there are 13 buildings on that property, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, since it was a college, it's set up for classroom-type activities. There's really a little bit more to it than Representative Powell than what you stated. Really, there's a twofold mission that we have in mind for Tiff College. Certainly to move headquarters out of Atlanta to Forsyth, Georgia, Monroe County is one of the major reasons we want to go down there. And we are currently in 5 locations in metropolitan Atlanta. We're not just in the Twin Towers building. We have lease space over on Park Space. We have GCI out in Decatur. We have a fleet operation near Metro State Prison. And then we have an engineering construction services operation at the GEMA complex on Confederate Avenue. So it's really to consolidate those 5 disparate organizations onto one campus, which through efficiencies and synergies saves you some money. So it's more than just the headquarters relocation. And primarily, too, sir, you know, we have Gypstick 2 miles up the road, the Georgia Public Safety Training Center up there. And that academy is 20 years old now. I believe it's your 20th anniversary. Mr. Mann will correct me, I'm sure, if it's not the case. 20 years ago, we had perhaps 3,000 officers, post-certified officers, going through that training academy. Today, that's in excess of 10,000 going through that training academy. And we, quite frankly, have grown so large over the past 15, 20 years that we've squeezed out that training academy there. Local law enforcement, county, and other state agencies are having a hard time booking space there. And again, Mr. Mann is here to provide any details that you may have. So a major portion of that intent is to move our entire training operation out of the Georgia Public Safety Training Center and actually into those dormitories, into those classrooms, using those cafeterias, and providing ongoing training operations there at that facility. Now, strategically, as you well know, sir, from being on our committee for many, many years, we have 5 prisons that are Atlanta North, and the prisons are where our money is. It's not in probation, it's in those prisons. And we have 35 facilities Macon South. So strategically, it's a lot better location for us to be headquartered at the intersection of I-75 and I-16 down there in Tiff College. One of your questions was the State Properties Commission did transfer that property to us several months ago, so it does belong to the Department of Corrections. Talking with local officials there, you probably know that that's the crown jewel of Monroe County. That beautiful campus is part of their legacy since before the Civil War. And they've been protecting that campus from other entities who have wanted to go onto that campus. I've heard, again, from the local officials that there was a private juvenile detention facility that was interested in converting that to a prison for kids. So they've really protected that. You're exactly right. It's not the initial cost of the bond money that's going to be expensive over years. It's the ongoing expenses. Now, the beauty of this alignment is that at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center, we have a 600-bed prison, literally 2 miles up the road from the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. As you all probably know, we use inmate labor all over the place, to include the cafeteria over at the Sloppy Floyd building. So we will have support to maintain, to operate, to run those kitchens, to serve the food of that prison population there at Burris Correctional Facility at the Training Academy. We also believe we can defer significant costs on the actual construction, retrofit of those buildings by using that inmate labor. For example, Americus, where we had that tragedy about 10 days ago. We've mobilized resources down to Americus, and we have on average about 250 inmates working every day with heavy equipment, heavy construction. We're saving that county, Sumter County, Americus, we believe about $60,000 a day just off that inmate labor. So we're really the only state agency that can operate a campus and not cost the taxpayers quite a bit of money. Specifically, request on appropriation, we did request last year, sir, $7.5 million for the architectural services, for the master planning, the space planning, the lead asbestos abatement. We hired Lord Ack and Sargent to do that. If I'm not mistaken, they're the architects at the state capitol who are doing that project. We have requested $31.9 million in this year's capital budget to finish the build-out on doing that. And where we're at specifically is Lord Ack is on the ground doing their work, doing their drawings, and we're in the process of hiring a construction firm who would manage that process. When the governor broke ground on the Tiff College, I believe he refer to it as state government south. We have canvassed other state agencies who might be able to put a footprint down there, so that if you live in Middle Georgia or South Georgia and you have an issue with a state agency, you don't have to come all the way to Atlanta to deal with the Board of Pardons and Paroles or the Department of Corrections or DHR. We've got some verbal commitments from agencies like GBI, for example, one about 5,000 square foot for a satellite operation there. A probation office, we would move there. DHR, Child Support Recovery, I believe GBA wants a small presence there. DCA, I think, wants a small presence there. So that on the periphery of that campus, we can actually be delivering one-stop services to the citizens of Georgia without driving all the way to Atlanta.
So I assume what we're talking about doing is we're talking about building a lot of other state agencies into this.
Yes, sir, but we would renovate the buildings with the 31.9 and then just have office space around the perimeter in those existing buildings. The headquarters operation would be clustered more toward the center of the campus. Training would be all the dormitories, auditoriums, the classrooms, the cafeteria, the library. So we would try to partition them off so that Georgia citizens could just drive actually right to this one-stop center and get all their social services need met, at least as many state agencies are willing to put a field office there.
Do y'all foresee that all of these extra services are going to be able to locate in those 13 older buildings that you're talking about, or are we talking about new construction?
No, sir. These would be, if it were anything new, it would be small, but it would be really identifying space in those existing buildings for small offices. As I said, for example, GBI is looking at 5,000 square feet. And I think most of the agencies just want a small presence there so that they could do the customer service for citizens from Middle and South Georgia without having to come back like I do on my hour-and-a-half commute from Noonan this morning to try to make it to downtown Atlanta.
The property at Gypstick that you're talking about being overcrowded to this point,
Yes, sir.
do you know if they have any additional lands to build more dormitory space and such as that?
Sir, I don't believe they do. About 2 years ago, we contracted with a private firm to look at all of our existing infrastructure, where all of our facilities are, and they identified a handful, maybe 12 to 14 facilities that could be expanded where water and sewer was available and where the land was available, and Burris was not one of those facilities.
The reason I ask a question that with the property and the facilities at Gypstick, there's base services that would serve all things, where only if there's an overcrowding that there'd be a need for, quote, dormitory spaces, as opposed to my concern of going down to the Tiff College is going to have to be an enhancement, an overall upgrade of the infrastructure services that would already exist 2 miles up the road.
And if I may back up on that, even though we're not adding capacity there, here recently we worked out a situation with Mr. Mann. Those were single-man cells, even though it was a medium-security prison there at the Burris Correctional Training Center. It was a 300-bed facility. It was limited not by horizontal space to increase the population there, but by the sewer and water. So we've worked with the Public Safety Training Center. We've got that problem fixed, and now we're in the process of double bunking all those cells, which is a much more efficient use of space. So that will leave 300 inmates to support the TIF campus operation, plus Mr. Mann's 300 or so inmates that support the training operation there at Gypstick.
Have y'all addressed the problem that y'all may have about displaced workers, those who work in the metro area that come into town, that work at the Twin Towers and other facilities around?
Yes, sir. Let me proudly put my hand on my budget director here. We lost a budget director who has family responsibilities and quite honestly could not move in 2009, and I understand that. We're going to work diligently with everybody. Nobody's going to be fired. If we've got loyal employees that want to stay at Metropolitan Atlanta, we're going to work with the other agencies to ensure that they get placed in positions where the work needs to get done based upon their skill sets. But when our previous budget director left us a little bit early, Miss East came to us and said, hey, I live in Stockbridge. I'd love to go to Forsyth. So we brought her on board. I'm sorry to tell your hometown there, but we brought her on board, and I believe one of the big reasons she came with us, in addition to the challenge of trying to operate a $1.1 billion budget, is because she'll be commuting to Forsyth rather than Atlanta in about a year and a half.
Do y'all have a percentage in mind that y'all are going to lose?
No, sir. The only really estimate we can use is when the Secretary of State several years ago moved the examining boards down to Macon. We interviewed her and her staff and found out that about half actually went to Macon. But the upside of that was the interviewing staff, far more people from the Secretary of State's examining boards were able to purchase homes because they lived in Bibb Monroe in Jones County rather than DeKalb or Atlanta or Fulton County. Her estimate was about half. We don't know that. But we are transitioning now, that staff. We have meetings every 3 months to update our internal staff on exactly what the timelines and milestones are. And we're going to try to put together some packages for telework, auditive work sites, and perhaps even busing next year to begin to hire some people there locally where they can work 1 or 2 days in Atlanta, but stay at their home location for the majority of time until we transition to that area.
And what is y'all's time frame?
We hope to have our academy operations up and running, dormitories online late this year, early next year, training operations happening early spring, and then full headquarters relocation, everybody. And we're going to do it in phases, by the way. We won't just pick up with the moving gains and move 400 positions. We'll do it in phases. But we expect to close out where all staff are operational at Tift College by May of 2009.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When did y'all start taking over the maintenance cost on the Tift College campus?
Maybe 6 months ago, 5 months ago. It's not been very long.
Yeah. We had asked through our budget office the list of maintenance items, and being such a big campus, so we've got $4,600 in maintenance items. That's all it's cost.
Well, again, there's no real work going on down there at this point. We have the inmate labor with details. They go over there every day and police up the grounds and cut the grass. So there's not been any big expenditures at all yet on that campus. We're still in the process with the architecturing and the basement and the space planning. You'll start to see the expenditures for maintenance go up here pretty soon.
Okay. I just thought it was awfully low for such a big campus. I know you got by the head trimmers and everything.
And we've not had it very long. It's just been a matter of just a couple of months, I believe.
Okay. Well, yeah, because we were noticed too that he'll supply all the receipts for the porta potties, and none of which seem to have been paid. So I think I'm starting to get a grasp of why people want credit cards from the Department of Corrections now. This might be a recurring cost that could go on a Visa card, actually, so that way you're not paying late charges to the portable toilet company. It's not much, but hey, it just...
Every penny counts.
Yeah, okay, so that explains that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Along those lines, are we incurring, I guess they'd probably be limited or none, but we were in utilities a minute ago when you said we took over the campus. Are we paying utility bills over there?
We are, and I don't know, Becky, if you know how much that is, but it's not operational. It's just to keep the lights on and keep the plumbing and flushing the toilets. And
all right. We've got some things, and I know you're working with the committee. The committee have any further questions, Department of Corrections? I have just one I want you guys to, if not address today, you can get with the subcommittee or get back with me directly on. I know there's a bill making its way through the legislature. I don't know if it will pass or not, but in regards to county subsidies,
yes, sir.
I know we've reduced the number of state prisoners that are in county jails.
Yes,
but if you do, you know, Becky, are you familiar with that bill number, or can we?
I don't know the bill number, but sir, I am familiar with the bill.
Okay,
yes, sir.
You could. I was just going to, if you could look at that bill, look at what it's called for, and get us a number should that bill pass. I need a number to go with that.
Will do.
We look at it, if we pass it from X to Y on the floor, I need to turn that into dollars that we would pay to counties, and then also ask to keep in mind that we expect to continue to reduce the days that state prisoners will be in county facilities.
Absolutely.
I know that causes hardship in certain areas of the state.
And, sir, that's why I think when Becky briefed you, those are all those bed openings that we have coming online. So
Exactly.
we appreciate you funding those bed openings. And,
But we just wanted to look at that. If that
Yes,
bill
sir.
should make its way
Will
through
do.
the process, I think it's important for us to have a grasp on the cost that goes along with that.
Mr. Chairman, did we give them the courtesy of letting them know we may not go into more details on this till the summer? I don't want y'all to think you have to come up with all this details on Tift College in the next couple of days or anything.
Yes, ma'am.
Please don't panic over that. I think this will be a nice ongoing discussion that we'll keep having.
Will do.
Thank you
Yes,
very
ma'am.
much for everything you've done so far.
Yes, ma'am.
We appreciate that. The committee has no further questions for the Department of Corrections. We'll see you. Thank you very much. Next, going in order that you are on the agenda, Department of Driver Services. I'm working on that. It's number 20, so it's going to be right after here. 20 of 35 to the members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. We basically starting off with just the four main new initiatives we have, and then answering questions. But our four main new initiatives is the first two are actually reoccurring from the supplemental budget that you've already covered, but that's the ongoing expenses for the 10 investigators related to the Georgia Secure ID initiative. The other item is $1.3 million for the ongoing cost for the opening of 2 centers, one in Loganville and one in Clayton. And then the 2 brand new initiatives in the 08 budget is our electronic document imaging system. It's $2.8 million. If you recall, we do about 16 to 24 million scans a year. Currently, we're doing it in microfilm. This takes us into the new wave of having a storage capacity and indexing system to have a way to actually track our customers and actually provide real-time customer service and get past the lengthy process and expensive process of microfilming. The last item is $487,000 related to 14 positions related to our call center. We have one of the state's largest call centers. Very proud that we do a fairly good job, but we're hurting in that area, and we think these 14 positions can get us to our goal of answering 85% of our customers within a 3-minute period. We'd hope to have it more, but we think this is a good start. To give you an idea of today, we're answering a little bit over 50% of our customers within 3 minutes or less, and unfortunately our abandon rate is about 18%, which the industry standard is around 7%. So this 14 positions will plan to get us to meet our goal of 85% and also get us down to that 7% abandon rate. We answer about 1.4 million calls a year, to give you an idea how many calls come into our center. And unfortunately, we're missing because of the capacity, and we're continually to grow the capacity. We just put another PRI, or additional 24 lines in our center, but we're missing somewhere around 100,000 or so calls because they can't get in because it's busy. And once we get these additional staff, we'll be able to open up additional lines and hopefully get all of the calls in, and people won't be getting a busy signal as they do today, and also reduce that abandon rate down to the industry standard of 7%. Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to answer any questions or go into any of these in much more detail as the committee would like.
Thank you, Commissioner. Committee have questions? Department of Driver Services. I'd like to ask if you would on, I don't know if we're going for the governor's document or for the tracking sheet, but basically 2 things really quick. On the governor's sheet on page 123, provide funding for the implementation of the electronic document imaging system. The $2.8 million is a one-time fee to set that system up, is it not?
$2.8 million is not just one time, I don't believe, Kathy. I'm asking you to answer.
Actually is.
It is
the
one time?
Cost, the
okay.
only cost that would be incurring going forward would be for one position that was going to be an ongoing information technology position.
And is that in the 2.8 as well?
Initially, and then it's around 80,000 or so that would be the cost for continuation.
Okay, and that's fine. I just wanted to make sure when we get ready to track that in the 08 budget that we just track it and note it correctly. And it may already be. I'm not following it down.
Yeah,
exactly.
I guess the only thing I would ask, Mr. Chairman, as we track it, there will of course be some maintenance cost after you implement a system, and also some reoccurring costs just as you have in IT to replace equipment. So we'll need to. If this is all one-time cost, we'll need to get back with you on some of those reoccurring costs and talk to you about that.
Is exactly what I was looking at. Is that we just list this in the budget as a one-time cost, and you may have additional costs that you would come back with the FY09 budget as an ongoing.
Well, this is a 2-phase approach. Actually, we will be coming in 09 for the final phase of this implementation. It'll be an additional $900,000. The ongoing cost, Kathy has it here, is about $420,000. So once 09 finishes and we have full implementation, the ongoing cost is about $420,000.
Okay. All right. We'll look at that accordingly. And can you, Commissioner, give us a little bit of an expanded definition of your 10 additional investigator positions for the Georgia Secure ID as relates or does not relate to the federal ID legislation?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the committee members had some questions. We were for the 07 budget, and we may have those questions when those positions get to the floor, because there's people in the legislature fairly adamantly opposed to the federal legislation. So if you could just address how those fit in or don't.
Yeah, the Georgia Secure ID actually does not tie directly to the Real ID Act, which is what you're referring to. Will it assist in it? Yes, it would assist in it, because we expect that if Georgia moves forward in meeting the regulations required by the Real ID Act, our investigative cases are going to probably quadruple. I don't have that number in front of me, but it's going to more than double, just because a majority of our cases comes through system verification, and the Real ID Act requires 4 additional system verifications, meaning that there's electronic verification requirements on passport, birth certificates, and what's the last one? And the SAVE, the immigration network. What drives a lot of our investigative cases, which we do about 900 a year, of which about 700 of those are actually identified with license fraud, which goes into the secure ID, and I'll transition into it. A lot of those come from our one system that we currently electronically check, and that's our Social Security system. In a number of our cases, once the Social Security system and our system do not match, a lot of times there ends up being license fraud cases that come out of it. So we expect out of these 3 additional requirements, if the state moves forward on Real ID Act, that we will have an increased need for investigators. However, the Georgia Secure ID Initiative is something separate. And what it is it's a collaborative effort with the federal authorities and the GBI. We've been working with Vernon and his group over there to talk about a task force. And we'll have 2 of these 10 investigators, or 2 of our investigators that we currently hired, sitting with the GBI, with the feds, and having full access to their database. And what it is a hands-on operation, meaning today our authority at DDS, or Driver Services, is we have direct authority over someone who tampers with an ID or someone who comes in and tries to fraudulently impersonate someone. That's really our scope of our authority as far as law enforcement goes. We are going to be partnering with GBI, and we do it today informally, but you need a formal partnership because we need quick and swift action. And what we hope is, we had a case not too long ago where we tracked fraudulent Puerto Rican birth certificates, and I hope I'm not repeating myself. But the case ended up, they were coming into our centers using those trying to get IDs. We called them, confiscated the documents, determined they were fraudulent, or they were real but the wrong people. They weren't Puerto Rican people. They were of a different descent. But we tracked it back to a group of folks in North Georgia. These folks were in South Georgia, producing these documents and selling it to these individuals, and then busing them down to South Georgia and trying to get IDs. Well, with the secure ID, the goal is to have the feds, the GBI, and us all working together. And we were able to actually have a success out of that story. But it could have easily gone the other way if the federal government didn't have their resources available. If the GBI was tied up in a number of other cases, we could not have acted swiftly as we needed to. And this partnership is going to provide that. The other thing is, currently we do everything out of headquarters. I have, I believe, 13 investigators today, Kathy, that are hired. And what happens is all of our examiners are trained in fraudulent document recognition. So if someone comes in with some documents that look like they've been tampered with or they're fraudulent, we confiscate them at the center, FedEx them to headquarters. Our investigators begin a case reviewing, and then they try to go out in the field and apprehend the individual if it's a fraudulent case. As you can well expect, we do not apprehend that many, because if they're fraudulent, they move on to the next town. These 10 investigators will be out in the state, spread across the state, and be very active and be very hands-on so that they can take immediate action. Mr. Chairman, I hope that answers your question.
Basically, it does, and I wanted to make clear that just if the federal government decides to put off or delay Real ID, that does not necessarily mean that you can't make some progress in protecting Georgia ID without being intrusive to those citizens that are in the state of Georgia. The 2 aren't directly connected.
They're not, and very proud that Georgia is one of the states that a lot of times they look at that is more secure than others.
Hi, Commissioner. Thanks for being with us here
Yes,
today. Did I hear earlier that you said that 100,000 phone calls go unanswered or get a busy signal?
Yes, sir, they do today. They get a busy signal, and what we'll do with these additional positions, we just opened up an additional 24 phone lines without additional people, and that allowed us to cut that down. But with the additional people, we'll be able to open up an additional phone line so that doesn't happen next year.
Would it make more sense to have some sort of automated answering and then prioritize people when they come in other than just getting the bid? That sense kind of,
Yes,
we
sir.
don't care about your signal, doesn't it?
We actually do that, and we unfortunately have maxed out our system and our resources to answer the phone. Most of the time, actually, our complaints, we could move in more lines and have it go to the automated system. Our wait times gets elongated, and then everyone is upset. Our goal is to try to meet in the middle today. It's kind of hard to do the balancing act. We've talked about both of those arguments that you just presented. One of opening up the lines, making the wait times go out longer. Currently, it takes on average how long, Kathy?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes to get to the phone. If we open up additional lines, it moves it out longer. So we've been trying to balance what's the best business decision on that. We think the best business decision is to get it to a level where everybody's getting answered within 3 minutes and nobody's getting a busy signal, and that's where we're trying to move toward.
Well, I certainly support the positions and the funding for
Yes,
it,
sir.
and to where nobody has to get a busy signal. But I call banks all the time for payoffs on loans and stuff, and they tell me it'll be 10, 15 minutes. But if I'll hang on, they'll get to me in the right order. That makes me a lot less angry than getting busy for 2 hours.
Yes, sir.
And having somebody else having to just keep dialing.
We'll take
till it
another
get in
look
there.
at that.
Do you think the busy signal sends the right message for government for friendly government?
No, sir, I do not. We want to correct that issue, and we'll definitely revisit it. We're just trying to get to the right balance. And
if this doesn't do it,
understand
please let us know if we need more folks.
Yes, sir.
I for one don't want citizens calling our agencies and just getting the busy signal.
Yes, sir. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I agree. Committee have further questions? Department of Driver Services. I want to just throw this out and ask you guys to look at it. 'Cause I'm looking around through this, and I can't remember if it was you all that were in the office. But to the extent that we can work with your budget analysts, and I don't know of a better way to say this than to just say it like this. I want these folks that are sending us these workman's comp bills to justify it. And the reason is I keep looking at your number and your additional workman's comp cost of $344,000, relative to your payroll. And the only way I can do that is to I'm not sure exactly what your personal services number is, but if I look, the increase in medical costs between 16 and 22 is $1.5 million. Okay, they've assessed you $344. I flipped literally 2 pages back to the Department of Defense, and we'll get to you folks shortly. But those folks have an adjustment, in their salary from their medical benefits from 16 to 22, which is how I'm just relating back proportionately to the personnel expenses. They need $271 to handle that, and they've assessed them $212,000 for their workman's comp. There doesn't seem to be a rationale between what these workman's comp numbers are, and I would encourage you. It's easy if they just send you a bill and you put it in the budget, and we feel like that's one of those things we got to fund.
Right.
Just like when GBA sends you a rent increase, I want you guys to treat it like your money, because it is. It's
Yes.
hard to come by, and I know you know that. But to push back and let them justify where that number comes from and why yours was $344.
I don't have a good answer for you. In the past, when I was over in OPB and worked with DOAS a little closer as far as rating went, each agency's rates were built on past experience, just like in the insurance companies for us on the individual basis. They went away from telling us, I believe, Kathy, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what our individual rate is. Used to, it would be like $204 per employee you have or something of that nature. I'm just pulling a number out of thin air. Now we're just getting a straight billing based on past experience and on an employee rate, but we're not getting the individual rate. Be happy to dig into that more, but just to give you an idea of what an agency receives billing-wise, it's just a flat amount, but we'll definitely dig into that.
And that's interesting, because the information we got yesterday from the departments, we thought it was a one-size-fits-all billing rate. And we were talking to some of the judiciary branches, and what you're telling me is you think it's basically experience-based rates.
In the past, it was.
Right, and we're not sure. I mean, it looks like it might be here with you guys.
Right.
I just, would ask you to look back at that as if you weren't going to get that money appropriated and would have to find it within your budget, and therefore look at it very closely with the folks that are sending you the bill. And same thing I would say with GBA, and we'll go into that later. But I mean, it's just because they have additional expenses over in their department, and they pass those through to us as rent. That's an easy way for them to get their budget fulfilled. So you guys do a good job of that, and I think everybody does. But we want you to look at those things. Don't assume anything has to be paid unless they justify it to you. I mean, in a business, if you were getting a bill for workman's comp and they didn't tell you what your rating was, you probably wouldn't pay it. So
yes, sir.
We may take that position too.
Okay.
In the appropriate manner. Any questions further for the yes, sir.
In all due respect, Greg, when y'all get those numbers to plug in, doesn't that just come straight from OPB and there's no questions to be asked?
It does, yes, sir.
I understand. And we respect their position in the thing, and I hope they respect us asking them to just, I mean, they may be valid and verifiable.
I'm sure that Commissioner Douglas over there, I'm sure it's based on rating, and I'm sure he'll be happy to share it with us, and we'll be happy to share it with you guys. We'll work on that, definitely.
We'll work with you on that. If Chairman Knox said he'd make up any deficiency you had, since he's the chairman, he's the insurance chairman, he would take care of that for you.
I do too.
If there are no if there are no further questions for the department, we'll move on. Any questions? I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, committee.
GBI.
Hi, I'm Lisa Yorick, and I'm the fiscal officer, and I didn't think that the director needed to be here today, so if you ask hard questions, I'm going to exit real quick and call him. So,
he may not want to come.
He would have come. We were told that it wasn't necessary, so I told him I could handle it, and he trusted me, so that made me feel good. Our budget is pretty much like it was for the 07. It's got the 3 initiatives, the Child Safety Initiative, the Georgia ID Integrity or Secure ID that Commissioner Dozier was talking about, and then the GBI meth force increasing that force that we've already got. And then, of course, we've got the statewide budget changes with the workers' comp and health insurance and increases. And then we have major repairs and maintenance for $483,000 to do some different items across the state. We have the relocation of our server and communication equipment, which is there at headquarters that we've discussed in other meetings, and the upgrade in the electrical system that we've discussed. And, one bond for our Somerville morgue. So if you've got any questions, I will try to answer.
Okay, do we have any questions from the committee? Well, it looks like you gave a fabulous and thorough explanation. Thank you.
Y'all made it really easy.
Okay, well, so we're moving now to juvenile justice. And that looks like page 26 on our tracking documents.
Well, I almost said, Madam Chair, I see the chair's back.
Sorry. You might still.
Clearly, she moves things along more quickly than I, so I should probably stay gone. So, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeff Miner. I'm Deputy Commissioner for Fiscal Administrative Services for DJJ. a similar story. We thought there were just going to be questions and answers, so the commissioner was held in another committee meeting testifying on some bills. I'll be glad to highlight some of the areas of our 08 budget. As you'll see, we have the similar items to all state agencies relative to pay raises and workers' comp. And by the way, I appreciate your comments about the workers' comp. I'll be glad to take on some conversations about why ours is what it is, and hopefully can find out a little more about why that is. We do kind of get told that number and have very little understanding of what's going on with it. So we welcome that. In addition to those general items, we have an item to expand our electronic monitoring. Those are the ankle bracelets that youth wear as an alternative to detention. They're very well accepted by the judges as an alternative to a secure bed for youth who are a lower level risk offender while they're awaiting court. Instead of being in a very expensive secure bed, they are at home, going to school, doing the things they need to be doing, but we know where they are. We put them on housebound detention most of the time, know their movements. Very inexpensive service. This would expand that to 60 more youth. One of the next major items has to do with the increased utility costs. That's also in our supplemental budget. This is just a carryover there of $1.1 million. We have the addition of 9 correctional officer positions at some of our most vulnerable facilities. Most of those are built around the staffing and incidents where we have a lot of suicide threats or those kind of things where we have to put youth on one-on-one supervision that affects our staffing pattern above what our normal staffing pattern would be. So we've highlighted only those areas where they're exceptional. We could use, obviously, a lot more correctional officers, but these are the critical needs. One item is to provide additional 8 food service staff. At 2 of our larger YDC campuses, we operate on just one side of the dining hall, and we pack kids in and out, crossing each other, getting into fights, those kinds of things. So we believe that both for also because of the time frames we have to stretch the lunch hours out, we're impacting our educational programming timing that we need, and we're a local school system like the rest of the school systems. We're required 330 minutes of school every day, and it's impacting on some of our academics. So we would like to open up the other sides where we can compress those meal times, not have kids packed in so tightly and crossing each other. It will improve both the quality of their experience, but also the educational program and incidents as we transition kids back and forth between school and eating. We also have a 4% consumer price index inflationary increase for our private vendors. These are our large residential vendors. This is the first increase in a number of years. Puts a big strain on our operations when in a 5-year RFP period on a private facility, they get no cost of living increase for the entire time. So this really is we need to keep these guys in business kind of item. They have not been able to provide for the increases in staff salaries, health insurance costs, workers' comp, all those kind of things that really, utilities that are really needed. Under community supervision, this is an ongoing effort to increase our juvenile probation and parole specialists. We supervise about 25,000 kids on any given day in the community. We have probation and parole specialists doing that. Those kids are on probation or they're under commitment order, which they might have used to been in a YDC, but now are spent their restrictive custody time and they're out in the community like parole. Our caseloads are extremely high. This is a 4-year plan. Last year, thank you very much for the first year of funding of this 4-year plan to try to get our caseloads down to a respectable level. We're not even getting to what we would call national kind of averages. We're getting to survival level. Right now we're at we were at about 1 to 53, and we need to get down to 1 to 35 over the course of the next 4 years. So we've kind of broken that up so it's not so big a bite at one time. We have an item to expand our 21st century after-school program, which is provided in our YDCs. Very effective program. This will serve about 1,000 additional youth in that program. Very inexpensive program as well. What we've seen from this program is kids obviously their time after school is spent in some constructive ways, both vocational, academic, tutoring, those kinds of programs and services. So they're not only learning life skills, so when they get out they're better prepared to be successful, they're staying busy and they're staying out of trouble. Our incident rates of youth-on-youth assault and those kinds of things have dropped dramatically in those areas where we've had this after-school activity instead of just kind of recreational activities. We have expand our Think, Exit, and Entry program, which is an academic and employment program. It is specifically around transitioning YDC youth back into the community, provides programming from the time they walk in the door, building a portfolio that they take out, also funds some transition workers who help connect them back with the school systems if they're going back to school, which is very difficult, by the way, or a job or a GED program. So very successful program as well. We have an item to expand substance abuse programs, not to expand, but to provide substance abuse programs at our YDC campus in Milledgeville. It's a 64-bed unit, and we need that funding to continue to operate the only residential secure substance abuse program we have in the system, which is woefully inadequate, but certainly needs to continue to operate. We have the continuation for the Savannah River Challenge YDC program. That is also a supplemental item that is to deal with that contract increase for the next procurement cycle. That kind of concludes our kind of new items and a couple of supplemental items, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Committee have any questions? We don't have to get into this in detail today, but we'll get the three folks that are going to be working with you. It seems like the telecommunications costs, and I know you're not requesting anything new, but if I look back at your budget, for FY06 and 05 and 06, it just seems like that's high. I mean, perhaps I'm not.
Well, I'll try to explain a little bit about.
I mean, just real high level. We can.
Yeah.
I don't want to take the committee's time, but I mean.
Well, most people are a little fooled by our size.
Right.
We have about 4,700 employees. We have 30 facilities. We have probably approaching about 100 court services offices spread around the state, all of which have telecommunications requirements, all of which in most cases have high-level computer access to do their work, both in the academic setting in the schools, but also in the court services office. We have a juvenile tracking system that we are very proud of that really provides us a great deal of information about our youth and what they're doing. So in those telecommunications costs are all those line charges and those kind of things. So
well, I mean, that's something
we can provide a breakout.
We can look at that as go forward. I mean, that's one of the things I want to look at with all our agencies are, what is quote-unquote base budget or continuation budget to do that. But
and I don't think there's any new in here.
There wasn't. I just looking back at that. Do you feel comfortable that in your line items, your request for utilities, same thing if you were here when we talked about corrections, so that as we go forward, I want us to try to, budget by department. I failed to mention that as we went through the other departments. But again, I want to try to align things that you and your expertise in working with the department know that are going to be sort of year-over-year stuff, and try to align that appropriately so we can do that going forward. I don't know if the amount of money that you've requested and has been recommended, you feel like will actually pay the utility bills in the budget or not.
Well, if it part of the problem obviously we all have is when we prepare these budgets, we're back in last summer preparing for an out year. So we're basing it on what our current expenses are, with some understanding there may be increases.
Sure.
But we believe that this represents a number that we've seen a deficit and we've seen growth over the last few years. And as we worked with our budget staff on giving some data on how we've managed that over the last couple of years with some one-time kind of savings, get a little fancy. We brought in some Medicaid money, replaced some state money, did some things like that to cover it in the past, and that obviously is not available to us on an ongoing basis. So we kind of tried everything there was to try to survive. We've kind of reached that wall. We haven't come asked for utility money in a number of years, as far as back as I can remember, actually. But these costs have been increasing, and we've been bearing them some way or another. But those funding streams are not available to us anymore, and we've kind of reached this place. But we do believe that number represents a good number for us to survive in 2008.
And that's, I guess that's what I just want to work to, a line. I mean, you've been getting the money from somewhere. I just want to budget it where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, we'd love to do that.
Well, we're going to do that. I mean, and if what that's going to tell us is if you've been having to take something away from something else, this committee and this legislature needs to realize that we think we're funding money for X, but it's having to be used for utilities. That means X isn't getting done.
Right.
We leave here thinking we're funding money for that. And if that money is having to be moved to pay utilities, then it's important for us to know that, because if that thing is important for this legislature, then we need to know it's not being done and fund it or not. But putting money there that year after year doesn't get spent there, it gets spent on utilities, is not. It goes back to what Chairman O'Neill said. If the phone's busy, we want to know the phone's busy and what you need to fix it, and then we have to make a decision from a funds availability perspective of what we can do with the money we have. But I think what we're after here is you're living within your means. But when we leave as a legislature, we think some things are funded and they're not being done because you've had to move the money, and we just want to be upfront and honest about it.
And we have and will provide you with kind of how we've handled that, and the reason we're asking this year is because we feel similarly.
Absolutely.
The money was supposed to be used somewhere else, and we needed it there. And
right. And now you're short.
We can't do that anymore. It affects services to children. So.
Absolutely. We want you get down to the bottom line. Whether it's services to children in your department or other services in other departments, it's important for us to know, because we leave here with a feeling that we've put money up there and it should get done. You're having to take that money someplace else. It's important for us to know, and me to be able to communicate, to Chairman Harbin and he to the Speaker and to the rest of the House. So we're going to be doing that for you. Yeah. Committee have any further questions, gentlemen? Department of Juvenile Justice. Yes, sir.
On any given year, during the course of the year, what is y'all's census of number of juveniles that are under detention, under your care and custody?
Over the course of a year, meaning in and out, but just total unduplicated, probably around 60,000 youth come through the system. What drives our business more than that is who's there today and who's going to be there tomorrow. So we look a lot at average daily population, and that's why I use that on any given day number. On any given day, we do have about 26,000 youth in our system. We only have about 1,300 in YDCs, which is our long-term youth development campuses, and we have about 1,100 and a little less than 1,200 in our detention facilities, which are our small, short-term detention facilities while youth await court or await additional placement to the YDCs. So you can see of that total 26,000 youth, really about 23 or so thousand are in the community under supervision or other services. And when I say in the community, many of those are in a residential placement but not secure, like a wilderness camp or a therapeutic residential type placement under what's currently our level of care system. But many of those youth are at home. Most of those youth are at home.
Do y'all have y'all made any projections about your annual growth?
Yes, sir. It's pretty scary. We do an annual population forecast, a fairly sophisticated look at not only just the census data, but also arrest data, complaint data, trends in the court, and policy decisions. So we really do a good job, I think, of looking at that population forecast and trying to plan for that growth. What we are trying to do, obviously, is assess very well the needs and risk of a youth so that we put the youth in the right place, both to meet their needs and to protect the public. And there's a balance. And we try to strike that balance at the lowest restrictive level. So where we can, we try to steer our resources to the community. It's both more effective as far as recidivism, as well as much more cost effective. Our beds, our standards are way different from corrections relative to staffing and the size of our facilities, and they're fairly expensive places to be. So we try to avoid that secure bed at all costs. Once a youth goes into a secure bed, they're on a downward slide. So we try to avoid that if we can and keep them in the community. And it costs a lot less, and that's why you'll see some of the caseworker salary, caseworkers in here, as well as electronic monitoring. Last year, you funded a program called MST, which is multisystemic therapy, very effective recidivism program. So we're looking at those evidence-based programs and finding the ones that are the cheapest and most effective in the community. We are experiencing the growth, however, and in our bond package there is a request to retrofit a facility in the metro area for a YDC. We have no YDCs north of what I want to call the fall line: Columbus, Macon, Augusta, Milledgeville. Everything is south of that, and most of our youth come from the metro area. So we're seeing the growth, and we need it here, keeping kids closer to their families, where we can make that transition more effective and successful. I'll be glad to share that population forecast with you if you'd like.
Another question. Shifted numbers. How many people do y'all have on your legal staff in the department?
We have three full-time attorneys. Of course, they handle EEOC. They also do our open records process as well, not just strictly some of the technical legal stuff. So we'll be glad to provide you their names and duties and so on.
Just curious, do you know what their pay grade would be or what they're being paid?
They're actually called legal services officers. They're I think it's a pay grade 16 or 17. Maybe it's not real high. We do have a director of legal services that's a little higher. One of the three is the director.
You say 16 or 17,000?
16 pay grade 16 or 17. I don't know what their pay level.
That doesn't sound high enough to me. That ought to be a little higher than that.
Not sure. I'll check and get that information to you.
Point out that Chairman Knox is an attorney himself. But this brings up a question that this is real tangential, I suppose, but am I missing something here? Only the Attorney General office can represent the state in legal matters. So when you say they do other legal things for us, that gives me it starts my
contract review.
Yeah.
Contract review.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They can't.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't act as attorneys.
They
act
can't.
as legal services.
Again, they can contract review,
unofficial
but
advice.
can they legally approve a contract to form as an attorney?
No.
Okay. So they review it, but the AG's office still has to do the formal approval.
Or DOAS through their attorneys, and if it's a big contract through an RFP, yeah.
But then again, I'm going to ask the same question if I had DOAS in here, because I don't think the DOAS attorneys can represent and bind the state either.
No, they can't.
So
Just the AG.
It seems like we have fleets of attorneys out in all the places that review these things to have to finally get them to the AG's office. But and I'm outnumbered on this committee with lawyers. We'll address that when I can talk to when I can talk to the Chairman Harbin and get more lay people on the committee up here with me. But,
yeah.
Okay.
Someone better than me to answer the questions as well.
We won't belabor that point at the time. It made me. We have the Department of Law next. Perhaps they'll want to comment on that. So, are there any further questions, gentlemen? If not, in the interest of time, we'll move along. And thank you very much for your presentation. Maybe we won't get off on too much of a tangent with that question, but perhaps the Department of Law can follow up with us on that. I bet you can opine on that for me, Ken. We won't get you too much off track to let you do your budget, but maybe that's for a conversation for a different day, Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come by and talk to you a little bit about our FY08 budget. And I certainly would comment just on the last question you raised. You are correct. The Attorney General's office is the lawyer for the state, and we have to sign off on all of those contracts. No other in-house agency lawyer can bind the state in any way, nor is there a lawyer-client privilege that exists between the in-house lawyers and the agencies that they represent. The agencies within the departments can't go to court either to represent the state. So in a real quick manner, that's kind of the lay of the land. Let me, I want to talk about obviously the biggest item in our budget, and that is a recommendation by the governor of $2.4 million to help us enhance the internal operations of the law department with an eye toward stabilizing and driving down the cost, the ever-increasing cost that we're seeing for SAG or outside counsel help here in the state of Georgia. We've given you a chart or several charts that I think you might have had before, so I apologize for giving you another one, but I wanted you to follow along with me as I make just a few very quick points about the status of our budget in the law department and what we're doing. If you look at the handout and note the first chart is a comparison of the budget, and it really just reflects what I've been saying ever since I've been Attorney General. That's been since 1997 now, that every year we're seeing an increase, a growth in the size of state government, and therefore an increase in the state government's budget, but we're seeing a drop virtually in the budget of the law department. There hasn't been a newly funded position in the law department since 2002. And this lack of staffing, our inability to keep up with the growth of state government, has literally increased our dependency on outside lawyers, or SAGs as we call them, with the result that you'll see on the yellow line. If you'll follow that yellow line on that first chart, fees and expenditures, they just keep going up. The second chart, SAG fees and expenditures, shows you just how much in a very dramatic way. We expect our SAG fees, or outside counsel fees, to come in for 2007 over $40 million. We expect the 2008 SAG fees and expenditures to come in over $44 million. Those are big numbers. The third chart shows you how the fees are broken down. The vast majority of the work we do, the legal services that we provide in Georgia, are accounted for by DHR and DOT. Those two agencies alone count for about 69% of the legal work that we do in outside lawyers. Department of Administrative Services comes in at about 6%. The next highest, and DOC and Regents both account for about 4% of the fees that we SAG out. Now, the law department obviously can't handle all of the work that comes through its doors. You'll note from the final chart in your handout that we've got about 192 positions in the state's law department. Only 110 of those are lawyer positions, and 3 of those are unfunded. We took the liberty, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, just to check around with comparable states to see where they were with their staffing of the law department. And I would note that in the state of Florida, they've got at last count, over 466 lawyers in the state's law department in Florida. And certainly our next door neighbor, almost North Carolina, they've got 233 lawyers in their law department. So ours is one of the smaller departments around the country. Our problem of inadequate capacity, I think, is always compounded by what we consider to be low static salaries in the law department as well. Since July of 2005, we've seen a little over an 18% turnover rate in the law department, and ironically, a lot of our staff tend to leave the law department to go to higher paying positions in other state agencies, whereas we've just mentioned they literally can't represent the state in open court and can't bind their contracts and can't provide them with lawyer-client privileges, but we're losing those lawyers to other agencies who have and can pay higher salaries. We've got to be able to retain as well the young lawyers that we're getting into our law department. If you'll note on the last chart, in the 0 to 10 year range. That's almost 50% of the lawyers that we have in the state's law department. And we're going through a period now where a number of our senior lawyers, those who have been there 30 plus years, are now ready and able to retire. They're literally paying the state by continuing to work. And so they're going to be retiring in the next year or so. And so we're going to lose some on the high end. And it's important to us that we be able to retain those young lawyers and bring them along. You know, being able to keep these lawyers in place will allow us to do a couple of things. In particular, they'll allow us to handle more cases because more experienced lawyers can handle more cases, but they can also handle more complex cases that we sometimes have to sag out because we don't have the expertise to do them. So we get a double hit in that regard if we're able to retain them. I really applaud the governor in seeing what we're having to deal with in the law department and ultimately what it has cost in the state. I fully support his recommendation on our budget, and I hope this committee will do so as well. I'll take any questions if you might have.
I'll get to the lawyer in just a second. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Chairman.
Whatever.
You can't insult the lawyer.
Never. We got pretty thick skin. Mr. Attorney General, I wanted to ask you, mentioned about the Florida, just the light goes off. But the Attorney General in Florida handles all the criminal work too, does it not, as far as local districts? I mean, I've read and have some projects in Florida that your reps, I'm just talking about comparing apples to apples. I'm not disputing your numbers, but in fact, as I recall, the Attorney General in Florida is also the criminal prosecutor throughout the state.
On state matters. That's correct, but they have state prosecutors as well, similar to our DAs.
So that's not the numbers you're including?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
I'm also wondering, even with the increase of attorneys you'll have staff-wise, things like the DOT, that's all the condemnation work that's pretty much done by DOT.
A lot of condemnation work, right-of-way work. Yes, sir. That's a lot of what we get.
Throughout the state. Are you going to be able to pull that in-house and do it, or do you think you're going to
we can do some of it. We can pull some of it in. You know, one of the challenges we have is just the challenge of geography. Where is the case? You know, does it make sense to send a lawyer 5 hours away to try and handle a case? We also get litigation a good bit. Anytime there's a traffic accident, somebody gets injured or killed at an intersection, they sue the DOT, and so we have to come in and defend the DOT.
And with DHR, those are the people who are handling deprivation cases,
yes, sir.
Child support, we call the, I can't remember the term for them, but are you going to be able to pull that in-house?
We're looking at every single department we can look at to try and figure out where we can pull some of that work in and where we can get the biggest bang for the buck.
Have you made any study, though, what you're going to be doing in that regard?
Yeah, we've done some preliminary
studies.
Yes, sir. We've done some preliminary studies on all of the agencies. We're trying to figure out where it makes most sense to bring the work in. And obviously, we start where we're spending the most money. Where can we solidify the base, add more lawyers internally, get them up to speed on what's happening, and then make some intelligent decisions about where to spend it.
Now, where we look at the figure on your line item 32.1.6, the funding part of it, is that a net figure increase, recognizing there be some decrease with what you're doing now as far as the outside SAGs, or is that a gross figure?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
I assume when we hire the 20 lawyers, we're going to have a reduction then of the SAG fees.
That's what we're trying to do.
Is this a net figure, or is this a gross figure for that 20 plus the staffing, or how's the figure?
No. This will be a start. Let me tell you what it will do. First of all, it'll help us to stabilize the growth that we're seeing in the SAG fees. They just keep going up every year. So what we believe will happen is first you'll see a stabilization of that growth, and then we'll start seeing some reduction. But this won't fix the whole SAG problem, what's being recommended here. We looked at what it would cost, and we'd almost have to hire 250 plus new lawyers in the law department to take care of all of the work that goes out. So this will help us to stabilize and then hopefully to drop. That's what those numbers represent.
Do you have, may I continue, Mr. Chairman, do you currently have a figure that is paid to the SAGs as far as the amount per hour they're allowed to bill, or does that fluctuate with the attorneys?
It fluctuates. It depends on the type of case that we're handling, that we've sagged out, the complexity of the case, and quite frankly, it depends a lot on the agency or the department that's asking for the assistance. Some of the agencies have more work and more budget money to deal with legal issues than others. DFACS, for example, we're still paying those lawyers over there some $52 an hour, I think, to handle their work, and that's always been a challenge. Their budget is different, say, than DOT.
That's the last point I want to make about that. When you're doing work for, say, Regents, Department of Corrections, are you charging back against their budget what is required? So the figures you have here are not incurred within your department.
That's
but
correct.
Something you're having as a fee charged their budget.
That's correct, sir. That is absolutely correct.
One last thing on that point. Could you please provide to the committee what you have done so far, as you mentioned, your studies on the allocation and how these resources will be applied?
Yeah, I mean, that's all just preliminary internal. We don't know what we're going to be able to do until we see what the General Assembly actually appropriates something for us to work with. But we're just taking some quick looks at it, and we'd be more than glad to share with you whatever we've got.
You have several more questions, but let me just ask on the SAG fees. On the, I think, third page of the handout you gave us, the yellow chart. Those projections are assuming this expenditure is not made for the additional lawyers.
That's correct.
So we could hope that expenditure would be down, go down. We're not sure yet how much that would be.
That's
we
correct.
Would hope that to be
and what we think, Mr. Chairman, is you're first just going to see some stabilization. It won't keep going up as much as it's going up. What you can never figure out is, for example, if you get a huge case that comes in that requires a great deal of resources for the state, whether it's water wars or anything else, that might cost you $1 million or $2 just to defend those big cases. That you can never figure out what's coming down the pike. So it's an imprecise art that we're working with here, but the idea is with more help we can stabilize first and then start to reduce.
Thank you. You have several questions.
Certificates have been issued for 50-plus years, or 50 years, 25 years.
Do I have to push this thing? Okay. To my friend, Mr. Baker, good to see you again. I've heard a lot of discussion about in-house lawyers. Do you have any concerns about out-house lawyers? No, seriously.
I remember outhouses when I was growing up, Mr. Chairman, but I wouldn't quite put them in that category.
I just asked you if you had any concerns about them. Right now, is your current caseload, to use my layman's term, such that it places the state in any type of jeopardy legally?
No, it doesn't, because when we're unable to handle a case internally for whatever reason, there's a conflict or we don't have the capacity to do it, we are able to deputize private lawyers to help us handle the caseload. So we are never in a position where we're jeopardizing any of the state's legal representation. We've got that safety valve. My problem is that we tend to use too much of it, and that we ought to be able to do it at a cheaper price by bringing the work in-house.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, my good friend. It's good to see you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm, for one, very pleased to see the governor recognize this and to put this appropriations number in here. Let me ask you a question that you may or may not be able to answer fully. One of the concerns that I've had over the years, and that's looking at the exponential growth of a lot of the departments of state government. And as you look at them, and I'd asked the last group, Juva Justice, they said they had three members of and I presume they're bar members. 3 attorneys on staff. Department of Corrections has got a fleet over there, and I'm sure that all other agencies do also. And the concern that I've got is whether the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. They're advising and giving counsel of various degrees to their respective departments, but in the final end, the AG's office is responsible for defending their actions.
That's correct.
Do you not think that, and as we look at this system, and this is only 20 lawyers, but there's a whole fleet of lawyers and legal counsels spread throughout all of state government, would our system not work better, in your opinion, that if these departments, if they had whatever the minimum as far as legal staff to do, say, contract work to be reviewed back to your office? Because I do know that, and I have suspicions, not unlike what my friend from the coast had said when he referred to outhouse lawyers, but we've got attorneys that are making recommendations that don't know what they're saying and advising some of these department heads. Would it not be better off that if this process, through the appropriations process, that there was a scrutinization of how many of these attorneys in-house are needed by these various departments, and that those be shifted to the AG's office to work in coordination with your folks?
Representative Powell, I've raised that issue, that very same issue, with the governor, and I will tell you, there's been a state study. Last count, there were over 131 lawyers in agencies around state government. We were paying a little over $12 million a year to those attorneys. I believe that the more we can rein in the number of people who are giving legal advice, the better off we are in terms of speaking with one voice, legal voice, on behalf of the state. I don't think there's any question about that. We do see cases, instances where there have been discussions internally, and the department has sort of set a course of action based on that, and when it comes to us, kind of at the last minute, we may not agree with the advice that's been given, and it causes some changes in where the agency is going. So the earlier we're able to get involved and to talk about, at least to provide our perspective from a legal standpoint, I think the better off we're going to be down the road. So these are challenges that we've been dealing with. I don't think there's any question about it, and we've talked about how we can manage this process so that agencies can have the help they need, but we're all on the same page, legally speaking.
I take it you're agreeing with what my observation.
I think you're right.
That if this was all brought back into house instead of it having continued with the exponential growth of all these various departments hiring more and more legal staff, that they might remedy a lot of the problems that we have in this state with the legal problems that we've had.
I think that's the correct observation.
Thank you. And I appreciate the job that your staff does.
Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General, I get, and I'm no mathematician, but a rough number of 2.2%. If your budget's $40 million this year, what percentage of the total budget is that? $18 billion. Is that something over 2% of the total budget? Or am I got that wrong? Am I figuring that wrong?
You lost me.
0.2%? 0.2%? Would that be right? 18 billion is our budget. 40 million is theirs. That's is that 2.2%? Yeah. 0.2%.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, that part of what you see in our overall budget is that pass-through money that we recover from state agencies.
Okay. You don't have a whole lot of choice in as far as when the client hires you, you got to go do it.
That's correct, sir. Very good observation. We always say we can't close our doors. If somebody gets sued or if they bring a matter to our attention, we've got to handle it.
And are they like most clients? They don't care what it costs until they get the bill.
Sometimes that's the case. Some agencies are pretty sensitive about it up front because they know the kind of budgets they have to deal with. But if it's a big enough matter, they just want to get a good result. That's what they want.
And I applaud your effort for wanting to bring down the cost. But I'm always curious about these comparison charts that I see, and I'm not fussing about yours. But when you look at this, if you as you bring down the cost of the SAGs, you're going to bring up the cost of the department, of your department, because we're not going to get this service for free. We're going to have to buy it from somebody. Either we're going to buy it by hiring people and doing it in-house, or we're going to buy it outside by farming it out. So when you show this is not really what the actual savings would be in dollars. It was the difference between what you're paying for SAGs and what you're paying right now for your people, right?
What's going to happen is
I'm not fussing about that.
Right.
I'm just saying that's a reality.
The cost is going to be somewhere, but my point is the cost is going to be much less when we're able to do it in-house. We can probably do the same work 50% cheaper than what we SAG it out at. And so if we're able to build an infrastructure internally where we can do it at a cheaper rate, and especially if it's not an insured case, we're just basically paying the rate of the salary of that person who's been hired to do it. It's not a continuing billing cycle in many cases.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, I almost said commissioner. I don't know if that's a promotion.
That's
or a
all
demotion.
right, sir.
Mr. Attorney General, I think I heard you say earlier that you may in fact be losing some attorneys in your department to other departments within the state that can pay them higher. And I know I'm probably about to do what somebody told me down here 4 years ago. When you start talking about this, you're meddling. But I find it to be a little odd that we have a situation where there exists a situation where you may lose a lawyer in your department that is experienced to go to work for more money for Department X and throwing rocks, stones over there, that will do work that then has to be signed off on by a lawyer in a position from whence that attorney left that may be paid less, may or may not be a better attorney. I mean, that's to the eyes of the beholder. But that just begs a question of and again, that's probably that's a policy discussion for a different day. But that how we have let a situation come to be with continuation budgets and the like, whereby departments can pay attorneys more than you're allowed to pay your attorneys that render advice or decisions that may or may not be as good, but by law, by Constitution, cannot be binding, and then have to have that approved by someone else, just seems to be borderline dysfunctional. And I look down this way, I have 3 learned attorneys. Am I missing something? Is that not like having, again, taking nothing away from the attorneys in your department, but is that not sort of tantamount to having a paralegal? Well, that's a bad analogy, because
that's your government in action.
Well, yeah, but that has someone that may. Chairman Ralston, enlighten me there. What?
Well, I'm not going to enlighten you. I think if we're going to have an attorney general, then we need to let him be the attorney general. I commend General Baker for the great job he does and for his friendship. I was thinking that it may be a discussion for another day, but I would ask the chair to consider asking those agencies and departments that we overview through this subcommittee to provide to us their data about their in-house counsel.
I had a concern about in-house counsel as to their ability to really stand against a superior, say a commissioner, department head, whatever it be, and give independent counseling and judgments that should be done by a lawyer. And if you're there with a commissioner who's provided your job and your pay and everything, and he's asking you to give direction on something he needs to lean a certain way, your independence is going to be compromised. Yeah, and I think there's some things to be considered about trying to bring these things all under. They be situated within the office, but under a appropriate management by attorneys.
Good observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you for all the help that your office and your staff have given me over this past session. They have been so quick to respond to every request and legal question and documents that I've asked for. I just wanted to publicly thank you for the efforts that they've made.
I'll pass it along. They work hard, and sometimes there's not enough of them to go around, but they're going to give you 100%.
Well, I'd say it's 110, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
If the committee has no further questions of the Attorney General, we'll let him get back to, I'm sure he has quite the caseload.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Pardons and paroles. I know we're running a little bit over. We had advertised from 1 to 3. We'll try to move along, but we have pardons and paroles followed by the Department of Public Safety.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Beth Oxford. I'm the Director of Parole, and I have with me Gary McElroy, who's our Budget Director. I'm on page 30 of the tracking document, and I'll just highlight our enhancements today. The first is a new project which Chairman Hunt has talked with you about. It's $796,000, which is a continuation that was begun in FY06, which is our cons project, which will dramatically improve the efficiency in our parole decision-making process by converting the over 52,000 paper inmate files into an electronic system. The next is $992,000 for our residential substance abuse treatment services, and those are for parolees who have a higher level of need than the outpatient counseling that is currently offered in our district parole offices. And then finally is the $72,000, which is for 400 additional outpatient counseling slots or aftercare treatment or follow-up services for parolees who are released from inpatient prison treatment programs. Those are the three main highlights, so I'll be glad to entertain any questions that you may have.
Does the committee have any questions for pardons and paroles?
Can you look at the cons acronym?
Yeah.
We seem to be having a love fest today, so I don't want to be left out of it. I want to thank. Huh? Oh, well, you had attorneys in. By the way, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I was late. I did contact your office to let them know I was conducting the regular Public Safety Committee meeting on the other side of the building. But you guys have done a great job reaching out to communities and not keeping everything here in Atlanta. You had a very, very successful public program that you did. I'm sorry. Before it was my sons, now it's my wife. My sons had one with body noises on it that I about killed them for. But anyway, I want to personally thank you because it meant so much when you met with a group of citizens who focus on crime in my neck of the woods. And to see somebody from Atlanta care enough to get off their humpus and come down and visit and share resources has been very, very helpful and productive.
Thank you, Chairman. We appreciate that and see that as part of our mission. We're very proud to go out throughout the state and meet with victims statewide. That's a new initiative that we've started this year. Thank you.
Further questions? Pardons and paroles. Section. Yes, sir.
Are y'all looking to move in your operations down to the Forsyth area? Is that?
No, sir, not at this time. The majority of our employees live here in the Atlanta area, so we're not.
Any have further questions? I just want to go and state again, we're going to help you work with this with a budget analyst, but your workman's comp premiums, I see it's just kind of. I'm not sure how those things work. We're going to look at that across the board. So we're going to help you do that. Committee have any further questions on this? And this con system is not to be confused with the CON that's going on in the other portion of the Capitol that it deals with health care. So
I think they worked hard to come up with the words to match up to the acronym there.
If there's no further questions on Section 35 pardons and paroles, we'll move along. Thank you very much. Thank you for staying here with us today. Department of Public Safety.
Yay.
Gentlemen.
Be nice to Joe 'cause he's my constituent.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mark McDonough. This is Joe Hood. Joe is our comptroller. We also have our budget director here, which is Robert Orange, so the team is here. Our budget is a flat budget, as directed this year. There's only one thing to note in this budget, and that is on page 33, line 3757, and that's the 1.2 that's put there for interoperability communications. Essentially, that's the phone bill. That's what it's going to cost for the T1 lines for the statewide interoperability system, and that is an annualized cost. That is the only additional thing from last year's budget to this year's.
Okay. Now, are you speaking just to this budget, or are you speaking for everything under public safety?
Just to this budget, sir. The first 8 programs starting on page 32.
Right. Exactly. Okay. I keep catching myself. I almost asked, does the council have further questions? It's the old mayor days coming back. Does the committee have further questions?
We doubled their budget?
Committee questions? We could do that, but it would be wrong.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I sure hope we can prove the governor wrong, the governor's office wrong on the salaries. That's all I want to say.
To answer, the chairman was talking about the salaries within the public safety department. I know that is something that the speaker and the appropriations chairman, as does the public safety chairman, Day, feel strongly about, and we are working on that. I would note, and I know you guys are aware at this point, that absolutely, Chairman Chambers as well. But you know, we have suggested, the subcommittee has recommended to full committee that we fund the positions that the House thought were funded last year in the pay increase, 3% for the lieutenants and first sergeants. I think that was just an oversight, and we have funded that. And at the risk of playing on that word, that increase would be retroactive to January 1st, 2007, as was the rest of the raises, I would point out, in the department. So it would just treat those 2 pay grades within the department equally, and the subcommittee has recommended that to the full appropriation committee, and we continue to work. We have also recommended, I recommended, and then I will share this with the committee, I had mentioned it to several of you, but there happened to be an opportunity in the Green Door, and I have recommended, and it is now going into the budget, that we include 100 new vehicles for the department in the supplemental budget. Now, that is to get through the Senate and to get through conference, but I would spread that on the minutes and make the committee aware. I believe, sorry, you could tell me, but at the end of FY08, if we fail to do that, you'll have almost 300 vehicles that will be at the
201 that will exceed
201,
135,000 miles.
Right. I thought it was 301. It was 201 vehicles that would exceed 130,000 miles. So I think it's very timely, and I appreciate the appropriations chairman and the other members, including the speaker, smiling favorably on that, as we are right now. But we will continue to look at that, Chairman Day.
Will those new vehicles have up-to-date communications equipment?
The actual vehicles themselves will, sir. They'll have better radio systems. They'll have brand new radios in them. That doesn't replace the antiquated radio system that's in the patrol posts, though. But part of that funding is to produce new radios for those new vehicles. Yes, sir.
I do field work on the weekend to find out about various agencies, and is my understanding correct that in addition to vehicles that are literally about to break down, I mean, not just in my area, but I know all over the state, that we have communications equipment that's really 1970s technology?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And I know we're probably too far along in the process this year, but have y'all taken a look at what it would take to remedy that problem at some point?
Yes, sir. This is an ongoing problem. This has been addressed over the years. At the time of the Olympics, there was a move to have a new statewide radio system with an exorbitant cost. That has just gone up from that time. That's the whole point of this interoperability system, is to try to plug the hole there. So, yes, it's an ongoing thing that we're working on.
further questions.
In my area, if I laid the pipeline.
We will be working and continuing to work with the Speaker and the Appropriations Chairman, on the salary study that Chairman Chambers and Chairman Chambers was involved in. Chairman Day worked very hard and pioneered. So we'll continue to work with that. I thank Chairman for doing that.
Thank you, Mr.
There's
Chairman.
no further questions. I know we have other. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You asked a good question that sparked a question. Is he speaking for all the agencies? I'd like to know, for example, how are we doing in Forsyth?
In regards to what, sir?
From old firefighting equipment and burn buildings to proper staff size?
Well, as far as our unit is concerned, our training unit.
Does that come under your budget? I guess that's maybe.
It does, sir, but those will be questions that Director Mann will be able to answer a lot better than I will.
Right. I was going to ask.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's the reason I wanted to ask. Sorry, just to make sure you weren't speaking for everybody.
No, sir.
You're welcome to do that. I'm sure you're.
No, I'll let them have that
football,
football, sir.
So we're going to let them. Yeah. If there's any further questions, you said you had the first 8 programs here, so
yes, sir.
Essentially, we know where we're going there. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have, I know, I can see out there even past the bright lights, a number of people that want. So I'm going to allow you guys to come in whatever order you like to speak to the rest of the programs under the public safety budget. Just remember, the last one would be with, yes, y'all need it. Yes, sir. Director,
Chairman, and I
give us just a second while we have to.
Sure.
We were scheduled, and we're running a little late. Chairman Ralston and his committee members have some bills they have to attend to across at the Capitol. They're not just running out on you. I'm sure you will give you the proper attention. Yes, sir. If you would just tell us what program you're speaking to.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I do have a cold or the flu or something, so I apologize for my voice. But I think we're on the bottom of page 34 on the tracking sheet. Yes, sir. And really, what we had asked for was just the flat budget with the normal things that everybody else had, the 3% annualized salaries and the workman's comp. And if I could answer Chairman Day's question, we do have some expenses that will be coming up probably next year. We have a Class A burn building that's 20 years old. The General Assembly appropriated in 97 almost $440,000, I believe is the right number, to redo 2 of the rooms in there. We're currently working with the Georgia Tech Research Institute to see if there's a better way to build those. The building breaks down. The concrete actually starts to spall, and it comes off in big chunks. Right now, we have 2 rooms that are still usable, and those are the 2 we rebuilt 10 years ago in 97. There is going to be a need probably next year or maybe the year after. I'll get as much use out of it as I can, but we have to have Class A burns to be able to teach Mod 1 firefighters. Now, the General Assembly also appropriated about that same time, about 1997, I think is the right year, Mr. Chairman. They appropriated money to do regional burn buildings. There's 12 of those regional burn buildings, but they're LP gas buildings, and they're not Class A. And Class A obviously being the flammable buildings, the burn buildings, the gas ones are nothing but Connex boxes that are spotted together. But I'll be glad to answer any other questions that you have. I mean, we have a pretty austere budget, and we don't have any in-house legal counsel. In fact, I don't even have a full-time budget person. I have one that's part-time.
Chairman Day.
Gosh, I almost forgot my question. I wanted to ask you about, you might recall the bill we passed last year that requires taser training.
Yes.
Is that in your budget?
I had asked for it. It was not recommended by the governor, sir.
Okay. I'll take a guess as to why not. Thank you. I better stop there. I'm going to get in trouble.
Thanks, sir. If that's it, Mr. Chairman.
I believe it is.
Okay.
Chairman Dave, if that's something we need to look at, I'll get with you on that. I think we're going to hear, we got somebody from Firefighter Standards and Training.
I don't think we do here.
Well, let me just ask you about this. I know that we had some conversations with additional training that you and I spoke about, and
right.
Some folks had spoken with Chairman Harbin.
Yes,
sir. If I could, if you would just make sure as we move forward, I know that's an additional item that you would incur some cost on a go-forward basis. I want to make sure that the committee has that before them for consideration.
Absolutely, and at your request, Mr. Chairman, I did prepare what I thought it would cost for us to do that.
Yes, sir. I'd like to get that and get
okay,
it out.
Sir, I have it right here.
Mr. Chairman, if it's what I'm thinking of, Senate Bill 44, is it?
64, I believe, or HB 113. If you're talking about the Fire Officer Development Act.
Right. We passed it out of committee about an hour and a half ago. Right. Exactly. It's a good program. I just thought you might want to know that Bill.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we're very much enjoying that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Patrice Kerner from Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. We're on 37.11. We are not asking for any additional money for FY08. We are just asking for a continuation budget.
Any questions on that? This is referring to 37.11 on page 34 and 35. Any questions? These couple of budgets, and I would say this is for folks to know that just taking care of the annualization of last year's salary increase, the COLA that was recommended, this kind of just gives an idea of what the increased cost of the when people talk about government getting bigger. This is taking care of the cost of the health care and so forth, because this is just really your personal cost that
Correct. You pay. And this doesn't even cover all, but we will have to subsidize some of it.
Just the, the $119,000 $1 million budget is 5% or so.
And out of that $2 million, about $500,000 of it is pass-through funding. So that isn't even part of our budget. So this 119 is just going towards $1.5 million.
When you look at the cost of we've gone from 14% to 22% on the state side of the cost of the health care, given a 3% raise last year. We're trying to get 3% raise this year, which is 6% total. So if you look at that, that's a 14% increase in our personnel costs to provide the same folks.
And those added benefits for personnel are getting higher. It's almost 40% of a person's salary we have to pay in addition just for these extra benefits.
When you count the health care,
correct.
The next question is correct. Any questions? Program 37, Peace Officer Standards and Training Council.
Thank you.
Who else is ready for us today? Does that conclude our person? I think it does.
What time frame are we on making our recommendation
to the for the subcommittee? That will be sometime next week, Mr. Later. And I would like to add, that was the thing I was going to get out. Yesterday, I had tried to divide up some of our budgets into three members. I think I mentioned it to you when we were last together, into three-member sub-budgets for a couple of these larger ones. I'll get a memo out this afternoon for delivery in your offices by email and or direct delivery in case you go home, of what those are and things I'd like some help in finishing this up. And with that, if I'm just going to invite, since this is a new budget, a new policy discussion, if you will, I was going to invite committee members, if they had suggestions or requests, this would be the appropriate time to do that. I didn't ask for that or make that invitation, if you will, at 07, because I didn't feel like that was the time to start a new policy discussion. I think this committee did a very good job at not opening up those discussions on a budget that had been to conference and been agreed upon. But now would be the time to have those discussions, and we'll try to meet to to discuss any we get next Monday, worked around session, so that we can have those. I don't have that from the appropriations chairman. He will be.